Fusion, the international science radio show.
Hi, I'm John Pane. I'm the chair of Digital Rights Advocacy, Electronic Frontiers Australia.
And recently in the news, they were talking about suddenly to use a search engine, you're going to have to identify yourself with a photo without specifying how that would happen. But I don't believe there was any public discussion of this the way there was about stopping teenagers using social media.
The Online Safety Act was passed in 2021, I think, or 2022, and it just did not give the E-Safety Commissioner powers to do stuff. It gave the E-Safety Commissioner extraordinary powers to do stuff, um, principally by issuing regulatory fiat. So instead of going through the normal process of legislation and going through the Parliament, both houses and committees, which is our democratic process, this very powerful regulator that knows what's best for Australia makes rules for how we go online and interact online. That's extremely strong concentration of power with limited oversight. So, EFA has always had very strong concerns about that.
So does that mean this latest announcement about search engines requiring ID to log in wasn't actually passed separately this year? It's merely the Safety Commissioner exercising her powers.
The the e-safety commissioner has the ability to require industry to establish codes. And a series of codes have already been established by industry and approved by the e-safety commissioner. So there's about 5 or 6 already online. In terms of the public's awareness of that, very limited. Even though there's some stuff on the website that promotes it in terms of outreach, it's principally industry that's involved in trying to set what they think are the basic minimum standards to achieve online safety for Australia and to please this regulator. So it's a matter of ongoing negotiation. In the context of the internet search providers, this certainly has been on the drawing boards for over 12 months. A code eventually came to a standard that was meeting the requirements of the E-Safety Commissioner and then was approved in June this year, all on the quiet, with 6 months for industry to initiate the changes and comply with the requirements. So essentially what the code requires for ISPs is it recognizes that there are two types of users. There are users with account holder that have an account with the search engine provider like Google, and those that do not. And the principle that they are trying to achieve is to promote online safety for children by preventing access to high impact pornography, self-harm material, excessive violence, and materials that may influence young people with eating disorders. And to do that, they recognize that there are account holders of a search provider, and that these account holders must be established to be over the age of 18. And the internet service provider can use potentially a range of methods to do that. Those methods may be, say, in my case, I opened up my Microsoft account with Hotmail in the last millennia. So clearly I'm over the age of 18. And they should be able to infer from my user behavior and account history that I'm a grown-up. For someone that opens up an account in 2015, the position is different. They may or may not be forced by the particular ISP to provide a date of birth when opening up an account. I think Microsoft does from memory. I don't think Google does. But in those instances, if I open up my account in 2015 and I sought to access pornography and I have an account, they have to authenticate my age. Now, what method they use is not specified in the code, other than they must take reasonable steps to establish the age of an account user. For all other people, that is, individuals who use a search engine like Bing or Google and don't have an account, they have an obligation now at the service provider to filter out porn, high impact porn images and whatnot, to filter out results to self-harm websites and so forth. So clearly, that presents some unusual challenges.
I'm a little confused because my understanding was that only a few years ago, this was raised publicly about limiting access to pornography using photo ID,
Yeah.
and that the Parliament and the Senate and the public rejected the idea completely, and therefore it wasn't going to happen, but now it's happening.
Yeah, it's stuck in the back door, as I said earlier, through regulatory fiat and by a lack of promotion from the regulator to the public. So there's been little opportunity for participation in discussion, which also goes to, I think, the powers of the regulator. As I mentioned, I said earlier, they were extraordinary. So if you have a regulator with extraordinary powers, you do require greater levels of transparency from them and greater levels of accountability from them, particularly if they're going to put in place quasi-legislative restrictions that impact individuals' privacy online and participation online. The government's position has been in relation to online safety is that while privacy has been important, online safety is more important. And I think that's a false outcome.
Yes, I mean the other thing is, apart from the fact that privacy, my understanding is that privacy has only recently become something that you can sue for losing in court, that has become a tort, that it's a something you
Finally,
can lose
yeah,
after a very long fight. But
20
this isn't,
years.
yeah. So seems to be that thing that we always get worried about when the government tries to regulate us or surveil us in our private life, that there's function creep, that they said it was about porn, which
Yeah.
the public was against and said no to. And now then they made it about social media, which people thought, oh, I'm not a teenager, so I don't care. And then they've snuck it in and made it about porn again,
Yeah. EFA
without,
has always held the position that all the discussion around the social media minimum age ban was a Trojan horse. It was a Trojan horse for greater reliance and gradual habituation to the use of digital IDs online, including the government's own MyGov site as an identifier, which, if I recall, Bill Shorten in his last speech to the press club last year described it as a Ferrari in the garage, when in reality it's more like a Lada Niva from the 1970s. When you're looking at its capability and its security. So digital ID is still a very, very strong concern to all digital rights organisations, including EFA.
and isn't that yet another thing that the Australian public loudly rejected when Prime Minister John Howard in the old days tried to put in the ID card as the
Yeah.
solution to all these sort of issues, and it was rejected. And the other thing is, this isn't the government's first attempt to censor the internet for Australians, is it?
No, it's not. There's been other attempts through internet filtering initiatives, blacklisting, whitelisting at the ISP level, all that sort of stuff has gone by the wayside. Many years before I joined EFA, and EFA has made many submissions in respect of those previous initiatives and was, part of the reason why they didn't progress forward because they were such an egregious impact on civil rights and digital rights. But this is like a death of a thousand cuts. So it's the boiling the frog technique almost that they're applying this time when you consider back in 2024 or was it 2023, government when talking about the requirement for identity verification for social media platforms said that um, the technologies were still immature, they couldn't be relied upon, there are privacy concerns, um, and yet in the last week of Parliament in 2024, the government pushed through poorly formed, poorly drafted social media minimum age legislation that provided something like 4 days time frame for consultation for civil society and others in academia, and pushed it through with 43 other bills. So it's just a grotesque abuse of democratic process.
And my understanding as well, I was reading up on this yesterday, that the Online Safety Act also required the e-Safety Commissioner to develop privacy laws for children, which I believe never happened. So children's privacy online is supposed to be
Yeah.
protected, and it's not going to be.
No, this is part of the long-standing review of the Privacy Act that has been going on at the federal level for about 4 years now. And um, at this time, the Privacy Commissioner is um, dealing with a discussion paper they released on the creation of um, children's privacy code to give children particular privacy rights in digital environments that don't currently exist, and to impose additional obligations on organizations that deal in children's data. So not just talking about social media platforms, we're also talking about the grubby little businesses of data brokers and real-time data exchanges that in the shadows of the internet collect and sell our personal data for profit. So that's a good start, but it's seriously flawed. It's seriously flawed because the Children's Code is going to be developed using the existing set of Australian privacy principles that are currently embedded in the Act and which are recognised as being not fit for purpose, antiquated, archaic, and from the last century. So, and they haven't kept pace with technology. So
Mm.
we're using a set of principles that are recognised as not being fit for purpose to frame these new protections for children. Where's the logic in that?
So we're
So
protecting them without protecting them.
exactly, it's the Clayton's privacy framework for people that are old enough to understand that reference.
And isn't it the case that we didn't come up with this legislation first in the world, that the UK has been talking about this since 2017? They passed it and they've never actually acted on it because it's very impractical.
Yeah, it is very impractical. And France are looking doing the same thing at the moment too, more recently. And because whilst you can have a policy, make law to reflect the policy to, protect the kids, um, you can get around that by simply acquiring a VPN. Now, looking at what's happened in the US, there's a lot of states, particularly the red states, have passed minimum age legislation for pornography. And pretty much as soon as that was announced, the most popular request on Google was VPN, cheap VPN, free VPN. So all those punters that were accessing adult content, whether they were adult or minors, most likely, more than likely, mostly adults, of course, um, would skirt the regulations by getting a VPN. And in other instances, there's a couple of the major online platforms like, Pornhub or X, whatever they were, have just simply said, okay, we're going to ring fence, geofence Texas or geofence Tennessee, and we won't, make our product available in your state, which would then again drive people to using VPNs. So, cat and mouse.
It seems there's two major problems with people using a virtual private network. Is one, that free ones tend to track you and sell the data,
Yeah.
and you're not, it's one of the business models. And the other is that even if you pay for it, it doesn't seem like it's very safe. And isn't it very likely that the e-safety commissioner will outlaw them in Australia so you're not allowed to use them?
It is possible that that could happen, sure. And I think the e-safety commissioner recognises um, that there are ways to circumvent these restrictions on internet access in the same way that I think there's a growing recognition that the um, social media minimum age legislation and the policy behind that to introduce age verification authentication can also be circumvented through technological means or through um, other means by using humans to collude. Um, so again, it's a matter of, performative legislation from the government in the politicians' folly saying there's a problem, we've done this, and the problem's fixed. Um, so they may be happy with a success rate of 70% or 80%, I don't know. But certainly it remains very clear to us and others that a lot of these controls with regards to our participation and access to internet and information, can be skirted.
And we could end up with a situation where our access to search engines is totally controlled, that you have to log in and that the login has to be age verified in whatever impossible way they find, while the porn, which failed, might still be completely, you just go to the front page and you're there. You don't have to use a search engine. Like that's very, I guess, 20 years ago, you might have used a search engine to look up naughty pictures, but today you just go straight to the website.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's problematic is the kindest way to describe it, I think.
And then there's so many issues here. Like the idea that the way to protect teenagers in any social space, let alone online or in reality, is simply to ban them from the space. Doesn't that deny them the ability to learn how to manage themselves in a social space, to learn the skills to defend themselves in an area that at least should be a little bit safer than an adult world, but they can't sort of how to
Yeah.
say this. They can't be shoved into the adult world at 18 with no prior experience
Yeah.
and expect not to
It's
get hurt.
it's precisely the point, and it's what EFA has been advocating for. Instead of having these harsh using band sticks,
Mm.
preventing, a cohort of young people from participating online, which, contravenes international conventions, by the way, um, the rights of the child and so forth. Is there a much better outcome can be achieved through education? And we're not talking simply outreach from the E-Safety Commissioner, which they do and should do more of. It's a good thing, but through the school system and starting now in primary school, because all of the kids born today are digital natives. All the kids born from 2000 are digital natives. My introduction to technology was quite different, and you know, quite nostalgic, you might say. But now it's incredibly different. And education is very, very important to achieving those objectives to help kids risk manage better. And we all know that as children, young people, the risk assessment part of the brain is undeveloped. You won't know what the risks are online through participation. There may be creepy guys online. You might end up on, chat roulette or something like that, and get a horrible image in front of you. In the same way that there's sex education at school, there should be, digital health education or digital health taught. Looking at the UK right now, where they're talking about introducing the voting age, reducing to 16, I think it's a great idea because kids, particularly because the digital environment, are much more politically active and savvy, want to get involved, which is great. Um, but there should also be that civics learning underneath so they understand civil society, they understand the nature of democracy and the importance of voting. Similarly, for accessing the internet, it'd be great to teach kids how to maintain a healthy online presence, what to look out for, what are the risks, and how to manage those risks.
Exactly. I mean, this is, as you say, for those of us who sort of weren't quite born into the internet ready world.
Yeah.
Um, there was an idea a long time ago of like an internet driving license that you would teach people basic skills of the fact that what you write is likely to last longer than you might expect, and all sorts just basic courtesy and online things to keep
Yeah.
you safe, and about scammers and things like that
Yeah.
before you got online or as you were getting online. So,
Yeah.
but it seems that now we've got not just children or teenagers, but elderly people, middle-aged people, all sorts of people don't really know how to stop being attacked by trolls. They don't know
Yeah.
how to handle the bullies online. They don't know how to look out for scams. They don't know that a
Yeah.
Nigerian prince isn't going to give them money just when they need it. All this sort of thing is surely should be just basic education, but for some reason it doesn't seem to have been.
Yeah. When the internet first became a thing, it was seen to be such a great thing, a liberating thing, freedom and autonomy, yada, yada, yada. And for kids, initially, it was seen to be like a digital cubby house, initially. So, get online, congregate somewhere online and muck around. Um, but it's changed because of the predatory nature of the internet, the business model that runs off it, which is surveillance-based capitalism and techno-colonialism, and how that impacts us as individuals, particularly kids. So a lot of the problems with social media and other issues relating to online safety can be remedied by having better and tighter privacy legislation, one that takes care of the best interests of the child or the data subject, looking at adults, one that restricts the collection and the subsequent use of personal data to that which is necessary and that which is proportional, um, to apply privacy by default as your guiding principle when building a website or platform or service, and to ensure that when you're finished using the particular product or service, that your personal data is deleted immediately or after any legal statutory retention period. So um, doing those things through major privacy reform will solve for a lot of the problems that are online today. But we and others are up against huge corporations that have the power and influence of nations now. So familiar with the concept of techno capitalism. Um, there's some very, very powerful organizations that sway influence over governments that make it very hard for civil society organizations to convince policymakers and regulators who are principally concerned with productivity, profit, prosperity as the endpoint. Often empty promises that are given by tech companies that are hyping up a product to increase market cap and get funding, and turn out nothing like that.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, mine, when I look at things online that are trying to put some sort of vague protection, they don't do what the government would want them to do. So if you're on Google and
No.
you've got safe search on, it
Yeah,
doesn't just block extreme porn or extreme violence, it blocks all sorts of things.
yeah,
And the same goes with the AI services. They have really strange guardrails. Like
yeah,
one of the things that the ChatGPT image manipulator used to be good at was editing photos for you. And now it refuses to do photos of you because you might not be you. But now it won't do it at all. And then if you say, well, how about a photo without a person in it? What about a cartoon? I tried to get a modem into a cartoon picture of a piano with a robot, and I was refused on the basis
shouldn't.
that it could be misleading
Yeah,
or lead to fraud. And I thought, it's a cartoon of a robot playing a piano. How on
yeah.
earth could a modem lead people
It's a very
astray? But they
curious
can't
outcome.
explain it.
Yeah, it's a very curious outcome. And in relation to Australia, we've sort of been wrestling with the AI regulation issue for a couple of years now. And certainly the deep-pocketed and well-moneyed business lobbying groups like the Tech Council of Australia and the Business Council of Australia are totally opposed to having AI regulation. But from our perspective, it's essential to have that sort of regulation to protect individuals and keep them safe online. We need to be protected from biases. We need to be protected from incorrect advice and misinformation. And our view is, privacy is a human right. And I think Australia is one of the only Western democracy not to have an omnibus cover the field human rights framework. And we need to have that, which includes privacy. And as far as AI regulation goes, certainly we should be taking a leaf out of the EU's book, which frames privacy also as a human right. And they've got some extremely good legislation there that is very protective of the citizens in the forms of the AI Act and the Digital Services Act.
I think it's so important because one of the things, of course, that's happened recently is there's been legislation to require companies like OpenAI and Google and the other chatbot providers to now record all of your prompts and requests and sessions with them and keep them so that government can access them, just like they might your search records on Google or wherever. And that seems most people think they're having a private session, whether they think they're getting counseling from ChatGPT or
No.
whether they're asking for medical advice and they've uploaded their medical records or their business records to get them sorted or accounted for or whatever. People are trusting these systems that are now keeping everything they upload in all their prompts and
Yeah.
possibly making them available to the government on request.
Yeah. You would imagine that would be through a lawful process, like through a subpoena or through demand for production of documents legally. But still, that retention is a problem. It's unnecessary and creates a disproportionate risk from a cybersecurity perspective. So you don't need to protect what you don't collect or store. So, and as companies like Latitude, Medibank, Optus learnt a hard lesson, and more recently Qantas, um, you know, you shouldn't be keeping lots of data. You should be getting rid of it. But that's part of the problem with the economy in the sense that over the last 10 years, um, storage costs for data have been going down, 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 and processing power is be going up, 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 up in terms of the ability to process, consume, and use data. So why delete it? Keep it forever. It might be used for it one day. That's the mentality, and it's a flawed mentality.
It seems more than
But
just keeping it in case it's useful. It seems in the case of the AI providers, they're using the data that you upload to train the model and your
of
prompts to
course,
train
yeah,
it, which means it can come
yeah,
back to other users.
yeah. But of course, you consent to that when you sign up for it, right? And is that consent lawful and legal? Probably not. Most organizations with jewelers, whether it be Apple or Google or Microsoft, treat consent as if it were a magic wand. If you want to use a product, you have to consent, which immediately diminishes one limb of the legal argument for consent, is that it must be voluntary. So a lot of organizations out there are getting people to consent to uses and disclosures of their personal data when they shouldn't and they can't.
It's a huge thing. So what can we do if we're not happy with what's happening with the e-safety commissioner and these huge powers that seem to go against our democracy in lots of ways and not take into account people's basic psychological needs and even students' needs to look up the news, which is very violent, which you can't
Yeah,
get on Google these days. Australian news is very hard to get up to date on Google. If I search for it, it's really not there.
yeah.
And often even just recent news from anywhere in the world, let alone violent
Hmm.
history. What do we do? What can Australians do if they're not happy with what's happening?
There really needs to be a grassroots push from the community, from the average punter, um, to our government through MPs and the Senate, talking about how our privacy legislation is so old, so redundant, and so ineffective and not fit for purpose. For year after year, since 1989, 2000 onwards, particularly when the Howard government first introduced light touch privacy principles for the private sector, it really has been what is the least we can do to protect the public uh, against, how can we help business the most because of profit, productivity, and prosperity. And each time you seek to dial in or pull back or calibrate those privacy laws to be more protective of people as a human right and for a better society, you get the lobbyists running out doing the chicken little dance. The sky is going to fall down. It's going to destroy the digital economy. The four horsemen of the apocalypse are approaching on the horizon. It's going to kill our business. Most of the people that profit from personal data collection, use, disclosure, and sale, large companies in particular, funnel their profits all out of Australia. So where's the net benefit for us? When it's all going through Singapore or Ireland as a tax write-off. So we do need stronger privacy laws. No, they won't kill business. They won't kill the digital economy, but they will make the internet a safer place for all people, whether they be young, old, in between, experienced or inexperienced users. Um, and as Australia does need to, I think, follow the footsteps of the EU.
Is there anything that I didn't raise that we should be discussing?
Hmm. Um, Certainly with the review of the Privacy Act, there are a couple of key things that are slipping through our fingers yet again. You mentioned that there's finally a tort of privacy, and that's after 20 plus years of lobbying from around Australia, from various organisations and academics to get this right. Although it's still problematic in the sense that you need a bit of money behind you to go see a lawyer to bring an action. There needs to be a cheap way to access that right. Um, Whether it's, pro bono or a friend of the court sort of motion from big law firms. Um, but there's still a problem with how we deal with small businesses because so many businesses now deal with personal data and are dependent upon it for their business models, particularly those that are online, social media influencers and whatnot. Employee records exemptions. The fact that these records are exempted from the Privacy Act is no mystery. That Peter Reith, at the time that these laws were passed in 2001, he was Minister for Workplace Relations and Small Business. Both got an exemption from the legislation. I'm sure there's a story there somewhere. But the biggest thing that we need to deal with right now in terms of exemptions to the Act, and which came to the fore recently, is the political party exemption, and that political parties can collect any information about you, use it any way they want, and share it with any way they want to. If they suffer a data breach, they don't have to tell you, but they can use all this information and use it to micro-target you within an electorate. It could be a particular street that can be targeted with a particular message, for example. And the the political party exemption treats parties as a special case, and it doesn't. And it won't interfere with their political rights. It just gives them responsibilities and obligations to protect our personal data, just like any other Australian business does, and just like any other Australian state or territory government agency does. So it's time it goes.
Mm. I think it's amazing how long it's been resisted to
Yeah.
have these basic human rights,
Yeah.
and it's really odd. So they've never even shown the dangers of adult material in all the many years they've been talking about the dangers of, erotic stuff being available to either the general public or to children or to teenagers for that matter. At some point, I'll have to find a psychologist to talk with me at length about the need for privacy and personal development. My understanding is that as human beings, not only when you're a child and especially as a teenager and as an adult for the rest of your life, you need
Yeah.
time when it's just you and no one's watching. You can practice to
Yeah.
learn something, you can get something right, you can have time when you're not being watched and relax. There's all sorts of reasons why you might want to be
Yeah.
private. And if you're online all the time, like most of us are, then why can't you be have some privacy to be you
Yeah.
online without being watched or judged all the time?
Precisely. And we go back to the famous New Yorker cartoon from 2000, when there's, two dogs looking at a computer screen saying that on the internet, no one knows you're a dog, which goes to the fact that your identity is not unknown, which was the way it was originally designed.
Support diffusion by buying from the Diffusion Science Etsy store. Catch people's eyes like flies. I have Hawaiian shirts, t-shirts, pullovers and mugs with many different Venus flytrap designs based on my photographs. Check out the shirts and other Venus flytrap designs at diffusionscience.etsy.com. I'm Ian Wolfe.
Yeah, there's been observations in various upper level primates where they've sought to um, move themselves away from the stare of humans, for example, who are watching them in their enclosure. And some of those instances have been where they've had a Hessian sack and they place it over their head. And, the speculation being that the orangutan believes that if it cannot see the people cannot see it. Um, so again, being tired of being stared at and gawked at and annoyed by people. But privacy has evolved. From the time when we were living in caves, when we were, very much living in tight tribal groups, privacy was very dangerous. To go off alone into the jungle or something by yourself may not have meant you came back to the cave. So um, sociologically, and with our own sort of development in towns and cities, there's a strong relationship between privacy to the family home and housing. So the ancient Greeks, for example, used their knowledge of maths to help the design of their house, whereas they would have as little windows facing the front of the street and have great open areas at the back. Going forward into 1600s, people would live communally in a one bedroom house that entailed your living and dining area, your kitchen, and your bed. And typically, um, people would live on the same big bed as a family. Only after chimneys and rooms came into effect, that people would, get their own rooms, their own bed, did personal autonomy and space, and the need for privacy become part of the human condition. And that evolved also over time with regards to property and having a house or having an apartment. And technology has always been a part of the privacy um, phenomenon, if you like, going back to the 1800s when the Kodak Instamatic camera changed things remarkably in Boston. And people's pictures were taken often in very embarrassing situations and put into publication, which gave rise to one of the first papers about privacy by a couple of judges in Massachusetts. So from there, it's evolved significantly with the advent of computers, going back from the 40s onward, and the democratization of technology and computers, particularly, such that now they're ordinary consumer devices. So it's you look at the timeline over a couple of thousand years, you can always see from a sociological sense and a technological sense the impact technologies or the sciences has had on personal autonomy and personal privacy.
I find it interesting that people's intuitions about it seem to be a little bit at odds with the law, with the way things actually are. So, for example, it's been, as you say, since newspapers were around and you could take photos in the
Yeah,
street, um, those sort of photos in public places are totally legal. Anyone can take a
yeah,
photo of anyone in a public place and it's just legal. And that's gives some of the excuse for surveillance video cameras and things like that as well, because you don't have an expectation of privacy. But the thing is that if you, as someone who doesn't look like a professional, goes to try and take a photo of someone in public without their consent, they think they've
yeah,
got a right to say no, and legally they don't. And this came
yeah,
across with when Google Glass back in the day tried the
yeah,
first lot of
yeah,
cameras on glasses.
yeah,
People were horrified that they were being recorded, even though there was a little red light.
yeah. The whole reasonable expectation of privacy is rooted in American jurisprudence and American law. And there's a lot of stuff in the Constitution which has aided Supreme Court decisions that determine that, if you're in public, you should have a diminished reason to expect it to be private and so forth. In Australia, it's a bit different. Um, certainly, at the gym that I train at and get people that put their cameras up, I get really cranky because, I don't want to be in anyone's Instaclip. And I probably need like a widescreen anyhow to shoot. But um, that's just me personally. But yeah, it's one of the things that is the disconnect is what's called a privacy paradox. Is that where individuals have strong feelings about privacy and that it should be protected, but then and do things like, go on Instagram and Snapchat and whatnot. There's a disconnect between the value and the behavior. Why is that? They've made the trade-off because the way privacy laws have been designed, this is where I was talking about later, is that they're shifting the risk burden onto the individual to make a decision as to whether or not they want to participate. And they can't make a decision when they get a privacy policy that's 10 pages long, written in Elvish by lawyers, some sort of arcane script, or there are, oblique terms put into an end user license agreement that says, I consent to selling your soul to Apple or whatever. And you have to agree in order to get access to the product. If that was flipped, if there was a digital duty of care for these organizations that deal in our personal data and profit from it, with um, stricter controls around limiting the collection and use of personal data, there would be no need for the person to do that risk assessment.
Mm,
Which,
exactly.
in which case they're not skilled for it, they're not prepared for it, and they don't want to take the time for it. How many thousands of minutes do you want to spend reading over countless privacy policies with organizations you deal with just to make sure that they're going to do the right thing by you? You can't tell from the policy. To actually know whether they're going to protect your data as well as they do, apart from that, we'll take reasonable steps to protect your data language in a privacy policy. You need to, talk to the chief privacy officer, talk to the security officer, look at how they protect that data. Yeah, it's not achievable. So the only way to do it is to make the imposition on the data collector and the data controller. So that's where we get our privacy law structures wrong.
Mm, I think so. I think that's right, that people expect to a large degree that if it's legal, it's reasonably safe. So that if the government's put something on you, then it's not a hard
Far from
decision. And
it.
it's not true. Exactly right. I mean,
Yeah,
that came in with even with COVID recently and masks, right? They didn't
yeah,
say do wear one or don't wear one. They said it's your personal responsibility and we won't interfere with that. which led most people to assume that it's probably completely safe to give up on their personal responsibility because otherwise the government
Yeah,
wouldn't have allowed it. But that wasn't the basis for that decision
yeah,
at all.
yeah. Correct. Um, so with privacy laws, all the risks have been shifted to the consumer, to the individual,
Mm,
and that's not a fair calibration. It's not an ethical calibration, and it's nothing like what like a human right should look like. So we now know after 20 years of experience of building digital economy, having a variety of digital offerings, we've seen huge changes in power dynamics in not just governments, but the effect of big tech and big media on governments, and their effect on us in terms of, our happiness metrics, how well we get along, and the fact that um, big tech knows that division and anger makes money.
mm,
So all
mm.
about the engagement, all about monetization, all about keeping you, on the platform for as long as possible. And this is where, for example, the social media minimum age argument is seriously flawed. Albo thinks that after passing this law, thousands of Aussie kids are going to come flooding back onto the sporting fields all around Australia and play football and hockey and netball and whatever. But the reality is there will be a substitution with another digital device. So if a kid can't get onto a social media platform, um, they may spend more time on PlayStation or Xbox or doing something else. Um, and that's part of the problem is that the digital duty of care is not being met because platforms are incentivized to keep kids and people engaged and clicking for as long as possible. And that's one of the harms that online safety won't solve for and what the social media ban won't solve for. And a bit of that comes down to parents as well.
Well, that's what's missing from a lot of the safety of children argument, isn't it?
Yeah.
It seems to be saying parents have no responsibility or power. We'll take that into the hands of the corporations and the governments. So you don't have to police your kids online because we're doing it for you.
Yeah. And I think that's a flawed proposition. Going back to our earlier conversation about education of young people and also parents, is really, really important for solving this problem.
Well, particularly as my understanding is as a lot less people, a lot less younger people, particularly are watching broadcast free-to-air TV, for example. So
Yeah.
instead, they're watching streaming, and the ads on streaming are all taken from their personal online histories,
Yep.
whether that's transactions they've made or which, end up as ads for things for you, or whether it's from wherever else the various apps have picked things up from a microphone, from a camera, from things you've searched for or
Yeah.
bought or whatever. And so you're actually more at risk than the older people who aren't online as much might understand.
Yeah. And the business will call it, it's just marketing, but it's manipulation. It's
Yes.
consumer manipulation driven by algorithms. So it's behavioral modification.
Yes.
Um, yeah.
And that also goes to things like social media. So I know people who won't go on Facebook because they don't want to be on display or they disapprove of the manipulation there or whatever. But of course, they have a shadow profile because Facebook tracks everybody in the world, whether
Yeah.
you're got an account on Facebook or not, by the other people when they scan their phones for phone numbers, when they look at their
The
text
pixel
messages.
is ubiquitous. It's
Ah,
everywhere. It's an infection. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So they can tie all your stuff together even if you don't use social media. So therefore, they're not protected by being banned from it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's most people don't realize that. And that's again another perfect example of the reach and power of big tech companies
Mm.
and how they need to be limited. And a good start would be getting rid of Section 230 in the US Communication Decency Act. So, which, sort of the government in the US has used like the sort of Damocles a couple of times in order to further their political agenda, in particular Trump version one and Trump version two,
So what is that?
um, where social media platforms are not held liable for the publication of content. So they get a perpetual get out of jail free card. And Trump in his first round as president of the US had threatened to remove that. So that's why, with his second term, they've come kowtowing and bearing gifts to the Great Orange Turnip. I shouldn't
Because,
have said that.
well, that's all right. You just can never travel to the US again. But
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this is the thing as well, right? So if you're a teenager and you come from Australia and you go to US Customs where they insist that you must submit all your social media accounts and passwords to them, and it's a red flag if you don't have it because that means you're hiding something, then all
Yeah.
Australian teenagers and children will be hiding something and turned around and sent home
Yeah, there's been a
at
lot of
best.
horror stories of people, legitimate Australian travelers, who have actually lived in Australia, in the US lawfully with a work visa, have sought to return and have been sent back on the next plane because of, content in their social media. You know, you know, some Trump memes, for example. It's
Yep.
like it seems that, free expression and free speech doesn't apply to people who don't like Donald Trump.
And the funny thing is, it doesn't even matter whether you like him or not. I'd read about one case
Yeah,
where they merely had it served up to them on the page by Facebook. So it was in their cache that they'd looked at it, but they didn't
yeah,
like it. They didn't
yeah,
put anything, comments on it,
yeah,
but it was enough to get
yeah,
them deported back to Australia.
yeah. Yeah, it's outrageous. Absolutely outrageous.
But then
And
we'll all be red flagged if we're not on.
yeah, so I actually, but EFA did post something on his Facebook page recently about um, travel hygiene, digital hygiene, what you should do before going to the US, and that included, getting rid of your social media accounts or hiding them and putting up a dummy one. Yeah, so it is extremely problematic, and hopefully short-lived. Couple more years and it'll be gone, hopefully.
Sadly, I'm a little skeptical that the bad things will be undone. They
Yeah,
don't tend to be.
yeah, we'll see.
We'll see how that goes. But it just seems one of those things that if Australian students are different because they're not online, that difference might not always be understood when they go to get a job, when they go overseas or other
Yeah.
things.
Well, there are attempts to replicate access to social media or restrict access to social media happening at the moment in the US. So those things may happen on a state by state basis. Whereas certainly even in the EU, you're seeing clearly in the UK steps to increase online safety by restricting access to social media and other content. So it appears to be sadly a growing trend. But if you flip the script and you regulate the platform and
Yes.
not the punter,
Mm,
and ensure that they have a digital duty of care, which the state sets the level of, um, you'll have a much better outcome.
well, that's one of those things. Like there used to be, Twitter used to have people doing a little bit of moderating. You used to have Facebook had professional moderators. And of course, since the person they backed got into the presidency, they've taken all those away. They've sacked them all. So you don't have the
Yeah,
moderation, you don't have the safety checking. You've just got ridiculous things. But that's not the real danger. I think it's yes, they should be moderating, but also when Facebook, for example, has actually done scientific tests on manipulating people
yeah,
psychologically on its own
yeah,
platform and then published the papers because they're so
yeah.
arrogant.
Appalling behavior, and Facebook has a long history of privacy engineering mistakes and then doing the public mea culpa. If you track its history over 20 years, you see that there are quite a few issues where they've engaged in egregious privacy breaches and essentially say it wasn't our intention, we're sorry. But they don't tend to recalibrate backwards afterwards. So
That's right. But I
they
mean,
have the knowledge or they have the capability
Yes.
and they keep moving forward, of moving fast and breaking things, which is part of the problem, is the pace of technology change. Um, we aren't able as a society to identify risks and harms immediately that come from new tech or a new capability in tech. And that's, again, part of the problem is how we put the handbrake on technology. And at the moment, AI, it still has all the attributes of a bubble. And you get, unsavory characters like Mark Andreessen, sort of a Silicon Valley, capital venture angel promoting technology as, the solution to all of our ills. So tech utopian, tech solutionist. Um, when in really what we should be more like is a neo-Luddite. I think there's a lot of I think there's a lot of value in taking on that philosophy. And certainly there's some really good books on that are out recently. One a good book recently on that is The Mechanic and the Luddite by, just looking at my desk here. Uh, yeah, Jason Sadowski. He's over at Monash Uni, and he's just released a book recently on this issue. And it's a fantastic read for those of your listeners that have an interest in tech policy and society.
Mm. It's an interesting thing because it seems to me that the sort of manipulation done by things like Facebook, where they seem to have influenced elections and votes, even
Yeah,
if only by 3%, which is enough sometimes to get you over the line. That was the whole thing with the Brexit vote, where that came out as a scandal that Facebook had
yeah,
been micro manipulating people online.
yeah,
And with the 2016 vote as well, they
yeah,
openly manipulated people online
yeah,
for that, trying to get
yeah,
Democrats to not bother to vote
yeah.
because it's
And even
not
zooming
compulsory.
out a bit further, oh, sorry,
Go ahead.
yeah, even zooming back out a bit further, recent research from the Pew Institute in the US indicates now, for the first time ever, there's a majority of US individuals getting their news from social media versus um, legacy media. And that is a really scary statistic to consider.
Well, it's I find it fascinating because I've seen that too, and I've seen that with people I speak to where a lot of people, well, if you go on Facebook now, what you'll find is a lot of the news that's shared is a screenshot rather than a link. So this
Yep.
means you see this shot of what made out, it might not even be a real article, and there's no link for you to check it up. So unless you're willing to leave the platform in another tab and go and Google it or some other way for you to check whether it's real, which you're encouraged not to do, then
Yeah.
you just have to kind of believe what's in front of you and comment on it. If people
But
do bother, then nobody cares. Nobody will read the
that
full article.
that's already happening. You're already being, stitched up by the algorithm. You're in
Yeah.
an echo chamber, and you're getting content that matches your confirmation bias, right? So,
Yes.
it's like, Soma, um, from the book back in the 80s. And it just keeping people stupefied, but with news.
It's and it's news that they can't check because
Yeah,
they can't even do a copy paste into Google because it's an image.
yeah, yeah, precisely. So again, it's been very interesting to watch how legacy media has changed over the past 20 years in response to disintermediation by social media, but also the growth of individuals who call themselves, journalists without necessarily having been to university to do a degree in media studies or journalism. So again, opinions seem to matter a lot more than facts, right?
And people not reading a complete article,
Yeah,
even if on forums like Reddit, where they do try and encourage people to put a link to original sources, people still either just read the summary and refuse to link through and read and they'll have this big long argument that has nothing to do with the content of the article, or that's about stuff that's been disproved in the article that was posted because nobody's read it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's social media. You gotta love it, right?
But Reddit has been so useful that a lot of Google searches now, particularly for technical questions, they all go to Reddit answers. So people are
Mm.
using Reddit even when they're not on Reddit if they're using a
Yep.
search engine.
And they're gonna age authenticate also, right?
Yes,
For content
social
that
media.
might be. Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Okay.
it's all getting very strange in all sorts of ways. And of course, if you've got a shadow profile and you're not on, which will be all these teenagers and children, right? So they're online, but they're not on social media if all the technology goes the way the government wants in
Yeah.
that imaginary world. But they'll all have shadow profiles. So they'll still be manipulated and advertised to when they watch streaming media or when they use
Yeah.
whatever they're allowed to use online where there's ads. So
Yeah.
they're not completely protected.
No, they're not. And again, this goes back to, regulating platforms with a duty of care, a digital duty of care. Until that changes, you won't see any meaningful changes in ways that will benefit consumers. So there needs to be some meaningful legal changes, starting with privacy law. And there's no reason why you can't build a duty of care into that, as opposed to having a digital duty of care legislation as its own piece of law, which could
What
also work. But hmm.
What do you think of the other part of the social media ban was to ban teenagers and children from YouTube, which I thought was
Yeah, that
oh,
was interesting because the safety commissioners, came out with some studies that indicated that 67% of content in the report, was not suitable for children. Well, there's YouTube for kids, which is, moderated. Um, and the initial exemption from YouTube, in the social media minimum age legislation regulations, and the exemption being granted by the minister, was because YouTube primarily was for educational content. Okay. Okay. So it's like if you had a ban on soft drinks, but then you exempt Coca-Cola for some reason. It's been part of the family for 50 years or something. Um, so yeah, it was a very curious decision. Now it remains to be seen what actually happens. But using the same rationale um, that the minister may use for YouTube, you'd say, well, why wouldn't you exempt Vimeo as well? That actually does have some age gating, and it does have controls to restrict content. And there's, smaller microblogging sites that people have that allow for some sort of interaction, wikis, all sorts of stuff. There needs to be, a series of blanket style carve-outs, in addition to carve-outs for big tech platforms.
mm.
So, yeah,
And isn't that, I mean, it just seems that as well as blocking kids and teenagers from finding things out or seeing documentaries online or whatever, merely because there's some sort of feedback mechanism, which means,
yeah,
Netflix, if they had a comment section, they'd be banned as well.
yeah,
And then there'd be a
exactly.
revolution, from the
Yeah,
teenagers. It just seems that if you're banning them from speaking online at all, then you're banning them from free speech just at the time when, they're talking about giving 16-year-olds the vote. Teenagers
yeah,
have a lot to say,
yeah.
and the idea that they're not allowed to say it anywhere in public is a bit Victorian, isn't it?
It's very, very um, prurient, I should say. Um, and it disproportionately and asymmetrically infects vulnerable populations as well. So LGBTQI plus communities are seriously impacted by being restricted access to information or cohorts or support network that would help them um, build relationships with people they want to build relationships with and that can help them understand their place in the world. Um, Kids that live in rural communities or remote communities, for example. You could be on a sheep station up in, Western Australia, or you could be on a farm somewhere in, remote Western Victoria. We can't necessarily go down to the local park because there is none. And you can't go and play with other kids because, they're 50 k's away or whatever. So it's essential for those subpopulations to maintain access to social media in order to not only gather experience in a digital environment, but for relationship building and friendship building and other reasons. And this has just slipped through the keeper. It really has. It is such an overstep. It is such an overreaction. Um, or because, it made Albo look good for a few minutes that he was doing something. Um, and I realize that's an oversimplification, obviously, and it's a complex argument. Um, but it seems that a lot of sacrifices have been made at the expense of both vulnerable populations and kids in general by
Mm.
interfering with their rights for participation um, in the Australian digital economy and also more broadly just being online.
Because that's one of those things that if you're not a conformist who fits in with the kids at school in your local neighborhood for whatever reason,
Yeah,
whether it's because you think differently, you feel differently, or even you're disabled, um, you have
yeah,
unusual interests, you can go online at the moment and find people like you to talk to. And
exactly.
you can have a social life with people, you can find your people in the world. You
Exactly.
can
You
get
find your
on,
tribe, you find your community.
yes.
Yeah.
Things like meetup.com used to be one of the places to do that sort of thing in the real world. You could meet whatever interest group that you couldn't find any other way, and that's being taken away.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that's a net loss to society, right?
Mm,
Um, and we're substituting that with this um, false safety or this pseudo safe environment that we've got by using a ban stick on certain segments of our population. Um, so it is, I think, the wrong way the government has implemented this and a better path forward, whilst longer,
mm,
and would have been more beneficial, which is the education and outreach and
yeah,
upskilling of young people.
yes.
And there's no reason why that, can't go ahead.
Mm.
But, it would be great to see this law repealed. Um, but, you and I both know that probably won't happen.
And there doesn't seem to
So
be any input for the e-safety commissioner to listen to, well, anybody other than industry.
there has been input into the Ease Online Safety Act generally from
Okay.
a range of organisations, including civil society groups like our own, and Digital Rights Watch and Australian Privacy Foundation, and academics. Um, but with regards to setting the industry codes, it's been pretty, I wouldn't say a closed shop, but there's a degree of exclusivity about it. And the consultation program process from eSafety was um, fairly quiet. You could put it that way.
I certainly missed all the things online in the last year about search engines being restricted to anyone under 18.
Yeah,
Um, as you say, there was something, but it was
yeah,
pretty quiet till it was passed.
yeah. So it kind of got us by surprise as well. But there's quite a few things coming across our table at the moment too. It's a
Mm,
volunteer-based organisation. We
I
have
believe it.
finite resources and volunteer board members and volunteers to do stuff. So yeah, it's been a challenging year, and hopefully with the Privacy Act review ostensibly coming up, part two of the reform process, we'll be fighting hard to ensure that lobbying groups like BCA, TCA, and others um, don't carve out important provisions and start doing their Chicken Little dance again and pretend it's going to be the collapse of the economy when it's not. Absolutely.
Can you tell me briefly about some of the other issues that the EFA is looking into at the moment? Because as you said, you've got a lot on your plate. It's been a busy year, and you're always busy because there's always things coming up. What sort of other issues does the EFA look
Yeah.
at?
Certainly, besides the Privacy Act, that's going to be sort of front and centre now that the minister, I think on Sky News on Sunday night, indicated that it's going to get green light and the some progress will be made. AI regulation is really, really important to us, ensuring that we have an appropriate legal framework in place, and not just voluntary guidelines, but law to protect Australians in relation to the deployment of AI going forward, both in public and private sectors. That we have a look at the digital duty of care, and whether that progresses or it'll come through piecemeal in other bits of legislation, which would be bad because historically Australia has, with regards to privacy law, had the Privacy Act, but then in other pieces of legislation, like social media legislation, digital identity legislation, and other bits and pieces, put privacy provisions in those laws when the solution is to have more robust privacy law to start with. So there's that. Copyright reform, particularly as it relates to AI, online safety, very, very important. And we've spent a fair bit of effort on the social media minimum age legislation, and we've made representations to the Age Assurance Technology Trial stakeholder board with regards to the technologies that might be used to support organizations comply with social media minimum age rules or online safety rules. So a few things are in the pot right now.
But John Pane, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Ian. Thank you for having me on.
Study science, because you will find in the study of science a richer, more rewarding life.